Tatiana. Am I, yes, excellent. So first of all, always just a wonderful treat to be at the Drucker Forum. It's my favorite event of the year. Wonderful to come back every November, and especially this year. Congratulations to Richard and Ilse Straub and the entire fantastic Drucker Forum team on this 10th on the occasion of the 10th year. So wonderful to be part of that. So I've also had the pleasure of being on the program steering committee this year. And so I've been kind of party to hearing about a lot of the thinking about the theme and the program design. And so let me just really briefly kind of situate this panel in the great scheme of things. You know, our theme, of course, is the human dimension. And that arose from this concern that management as a discipline, as it's practiced, as it's taught, has maybe become a little too machine-smitten. That although what could be a more human endeavor than management, the entire purpose of enterprises is to serve people, all the stakeholders of the organizations we work in are human. And yet, when you look at how management is approached by so many well-trained managers, it's with very much a machine metaphor, a sort of engineering mindset, and an eagerness to automate all work, including apparently coffee serving. So management is, of course, human-centric work, and the different stakeholders that we felt we needed to think about in the course of the conference. You just heard about the biggest construction of humanity that managers have to serve, and that's society. The next panel after ours will move into the customer stakeholder community and how innovation gets produced by organizations for customers. Our panel is really about the workforce of the organization and what you might call the work layer, how work gets done in organizations. And so I have a terrific panel to help think about how that work could be the human dimension could be enhanced in that area of management. Next to me is Yves Pigneur. I want to especially thank him for being here because in your programs it says that Linda Grattan was on this panel. Unfortunately, Linda came down with flu, so it speaks to Yves' great flexibility and also the sort of bench strength. Actually, Yves, I'm not going to have you speak just yet. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and thank you to you.
Ready to go.
Yeah, really good.
But thanks for your manifest willingness to jump up at any moment, displayed again. So Yves is a professor of management information systems at the University of Lausanne, and he's also partner to Alex Osterwalder, and together they created the business model generation system that we've become familiar with here at the Drucker Forum. Has also authored a couple of books, and this is going to be a theme on this panel as well. Next to him is Jim Keane, who's the president and CEO of Steelcase. You know Steelcase, so we're going to get sort of a double perspective here in that Jim is obviously the manager of an organization full of people, many thousands of them, but also the entire nature of his company is that they think about the design of workplaces, and so he has to think about that on behalf of customers as well. He's been at Steelcase since 1997, and he's been CEO since 2014. Next to him is John Hagel, co-chairman of the Deloitte Center for the Edge. John has written many books, and if you don't know the Deloitte Center for the Edge, it's essentially a think tank within Deloitte Consulting that thinks about big trends and specifically the big shift that, and without stealing any of John's thunder, you'll probably hear more about their tracking of the big shift that's going on in the world of work. John is also as I mentioned, an author. You'll find his books out at the stand for sure, but I'll name a couple of them. The Power of Pull, Net Gain, Net Worth. Those are 3 of, I don't know, probably half a dozen at least. And finally, Hal Gregersen, who has a brand new book to his name, which is Questions Are the Answer. Now, can I get the actual subtitle by a breakthrough approach to solving your most vexing problems
in work and in life.
And in
there
life,
we go.
yes, right. So let's just leave it at Questions Are the Answers. Came out just, I think, 10 days ago, totally new. And Hal is from MIT, where he's part of the Sloan School. He's also the executive director of the Sloan School, or of MIT's Center for Leadership. So thank you all for being here. And the way we're going to structure this is that we're going to ask each of our panelists to put a kind of a position statement out there on how the human dimension may have been neglected and how it can be improved. We're going to start with Jim Keane.
Thank you. So, can you all hear me okay? It's getting there, right? Yeah. My first job was elevator operator. Now, some of you might remember this when we had manual elevators in the old buildings in the old cities of the world. These buildings were operated manually with a crank, and so someone would stand in that elevator all day and pull the crank back, and the elevator would go up, push the crank forward, the elevator would go down, there was a door you would operate. That was my job. I did that for a whole summer back in the late 1970s. And I think today, as you know, technology eliminated the job of the elevator operator. In fact, the elevator is arguably the first autonomous vehicle. We don't even think about it. We just go in and push the button, and we go up and down in the elevator, but that used to be my job. And I think when I talk to people who remember elevator operators, they remember those days romantically, nostalgically perhaps, and they say, wasn't it nice when we had people in the elevator? Those people never worked as elevator operators. Let me tell you, that was an awful job. Can you even imagine having to stand in an elevator for 10 hours a day, doing nothing but going up and down, with nothing but a little crank, and you weren't allowed to talk to the people, you were just supposed to do your job. They would tell you the floor number, you would go up or down. I would go on break, and we had these 15-minute breaks, and I realized I just had to get through the summer. After 5 days, I was losing my mind, but these people had done this job for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And at the breaks, they would gossip about their coworkers, and they would complain about the pay or the benefits or the work conditions. And they did this because we had nothing else to think about. For 10 hours a day, we sat in this elevator and did this mindless task of going up and down. And sadly, there's a lot of jobs like that, but happily, automation has eliminated a lot of them. And so I welcome automation. I think, in fact, we've had 100 years of automation that has eliminated jobs like that one, that took people and put them in dehumanizing positions, jobs that were dangerous, jobs that were mind-numbing, jobs that were back-breaking. These jobs largely have disappeared. And that's something I welcome when I think about how technology might continue to change the future. Yes, it's hard for the elevator operators. My uncle was an elevator operator. It was difficult for them as that technology came along. But if we think about society in the long run, we need less jobs like that and more jobs that celebrate with the things that make us human. Unfortunately, technology doesn't move as quickly sometimes as we'd like. We automate parts of a job and we don't automate the rest of it. And this picture perhaps illustrates this. So I don't have to tell you much about what it must feel like to work in an environment like this. You can tell the messages that are being sent just by the way people set up the furniture. You're all the same. We expect you all to do your job exactly the same way as the other person. And tomorrow we want you to do the job the same way as you did it today. The objective of the people working in a call center environment like this is uniformity. We want you all to be the same. It's no different, really. It's really the data processing version of an elevator operator. We want you to sit at this piece of technology. We've been able to automate a part of the job, but there's this last part that involves talking to a customer who might call into the call center. We couldn't figure out how to automate that part right away. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take people, and we're going to teach people how to work as if they're robots. We're going to give them scripts to follow, and we're going to demand that they follow that script. And we're going to measure their productivity in terms of how many calls they can process per hour. Turnover is extremely high in call centers. It's not unusual to see 30 or 40% turnover in a call center. Some call centers have 50% turnover. People don't like these jobs. These are very difficult jobs to get excited about and to be highly engaged as you work in places like this. So whether it's elevator operators or it's call center operators, the challenge for us is how do we think about how we apply technology to eliminate the parts that technology does very well, but have technology do the parts that technology does well so that humans can do the part that humans do well. We worry about how technology is going to eliminate jobs, and certainly that's happening. There's two numbers on this page. The first number, both of them are from McKinsey work. The first number represents an estimate by McKinsey of how many jobs might be eliminated by technology in the coming years, about 15%. I won't debate whether that's a big number or a small number, but it's a number, it's 15%, and it's going to have an impact on people, and we should be mindful about that. The other number on this page is 60%. That number is frightening. That number is the percentage of jobs that will be substantially transformed by technology. It means jobs that are not automated today that will be partially automated. If we do that the way we automated call center work, so that we ask the people to just be overlords of the computer, monitoring the computer to see if the computer makes a mistake, maybe doing some small, mindful, trivial task, we'll have missed the whole point. And we will have created more jobs like the jobs that I graduated from as an elevator operator. We'll create more jobs like call center workers. It's something I think we have to be very careful about as technology enables new kinds of work, that we as leaders create jobs that people actually want to do, that we understand the human side of work more completely, jobs that will naturally engage people by using a broader set of their skills. So we have to do training of people to help them learn how to be better at using technology, but I also wonder if we have to train people to be better at being human too. And I'm going to talk about just one part about being human. I could talk about creativity, persuasion, negotiation, connectivity. So many things make people people. The one thing that I think is at the root of all this is the word empathy. Empathy is simply this idea of being able to feel what somebody else is feeling. How can we create work and how can we translate management into something that really celebrates empathy, celebrates our ability, our native ability to understand what somebody else is feeling? What got me through that summer as an elevator operator was the fact that I broke one of the rules. I decided I was going to talk to the people. And I could tell if somebody was having a good day or a bad day. I can make them smile. I could tell them a joke, give them a word of encouragement. That's what started to give that job meaning for me. We've all been on the phone with a call center operator who goes off script because they realize that they can't solve your problem with that script. And they break the rule and they help you in a more human way. How can we create more jobs that actually build that in by design? We allow humans to be humans. And let's start with management. So I've been taught, just as many of you have been taught, a script for how CEOs should operate. And part of that was evident 4 years ago when I became CEO. We were having our first meeting of managers of the company. 150 people were coming into headquarters. The script is the new CEO has to give a speech, has to tell everyone what's my vision for the company. Most of my speech was going to be about culture and things I saw in our culture that we had to make a little bit better. But I wondered, how am I actually going to do this using the tools I've been taught, tools of persuasion that I can embed into a speech? Is that really going to do it? So we tried something we'd never been taught, tried something that I wasn't sure was going to work. What we tried was bringing people into a room like this and started by asking them to describe Steelcase's culture by shouting words out. And we would capture the words on a screen at the front of the room. Wonderful things about our company. We have a great company, and people are very proud of it. And then rather than continue the meeting, we took those 150 people and we broke them up into 75 teams of 2. And we sent them out into the company, into our factories, into the various floors of the building to meet with other employees, groups of 5 or 6. And they could only ask 3 questions. What's getting better? What's getting worse? And how does it make you feel? They weren't allowed to solve problems. They were just allowed to feel what it feels like to work at Steelcase. And when they came back in the room, some people were highly energized, but a lot of people were really disturbed, really bothered by what they had heard. Not everybody was as happy as we were. Not everyone would describe the culture using the words that were on that screen. There were people who felt frustrated that they couldn't get their jobs done because of bureaucracy and processes we had in the company. There were people who had been bullied by their immediate supervisor. And the leaders of the company had no idea that these things were going on. I didn't have to persuade them that we needed to change the culture. They felt they needed to persuade me now that this culture needed to change, that there was opportunities for us to be better. All we did is practice something we had never done before. We broke the rule about what you do at a management meeting by sending people out to listen for a few hours before we came back in and charted our course. So that's our challenge, I think. We should let technology do more of what technology is good at. We need to help people learn about technology, but then we also have to reinvest in ourselves, in what it means to be human, from the bottom of our companies to the very top, and build new management practices that make empathy something we do on a routine basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. And can we just go straight into John Hagel's comments? We're going to get 4 sets of ideas out on the table, and then we'll mix it up a little. And I want to remind everyone to be using your Slido technology on your phone to start submitting questions. You can do that throughout, and we'll turn to them at the end. John.
Great. Thank you. It's great to be here. The topic future of work, I find everyone is talking about these days. It's in every business publication and every meeting I go to, people want to know about the future of work. And it covers a broad range of topics, everything from automation. Jim shared the statistics about how many jobs are going to be eliminated in what period of time. There are all kinds of debates on that. There are focused on reskilling workers. How do we reskill them? Augmentation of workers with technology, the emergence of the gig economy. There are a whole range of topics that are included in this discussion. There's one topic which I think too few people are actually addressing. And in our view, it's actually the biggest topic of all, or the biggest opportunity of all, which has to do with going back to the most basic question of work, of all, which is what should work be? And this is to build on Jim's comments. The question is to go back and really question what should work be? And I think that generalization, in my experience, most work in most institutions today are routine tasks. In a world of scalable efficiency, we have adopted a view of work which is we tightly specify every task. We highly standardize those tasks so they're done in the same efficient way everywhere in the organization. And we tightly integrate the tasks, remove all those inefficient buffers. If that's what work is, machines can do that so much better than we humans can. And I think it's a blessing that the machines will be taking that work at an accelerating rate. Because for the first time, it now allows us to go back to that question of what could work be for human beings. Our belief is the work that will drive the growth and prosperity of economies around the world is a very different kind of work. Rather than routine tasks, it's focusing workers on identifying and addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value throughout the organization. That's a very different form of work. We've actually done a series we just published a research report looking at case studies of a few companies that have actually started this process of redefining work in this mode. And by the way, I'm from Silicon Valley, we deliberately avoided any examples from Silicon Valley or high-tech companies. We wanted to go to very traditional industries and very traditional work groups to figure out how were they redefining work. My favorite example is a company, Morningstar Tomato Company, tomato producer, farmers and factory workers. And they've redefined work at a fundamental level for all their workers and created enormous value as a result of that. So I think it's an illustration that it's possible, but it has a lot of implications if we take this seriously. One is, I think it forces us to shift our focus. Today, again, all the focus that I encounter in the future of work discussions is reskilling, which is basically how do we give workers a different set of skills so they can perform another set of routine tasks more efficiently. Skills are very context specific, how to operate a particular machine, how to process a particular kind of paperwork in a particular environment. Our view is that rather than focusing on skills, what we should focus on are capabilities. And it's a bit of a semantic difference, but to us, capabilities are much more fundamental and context independent. They have to do with things like curiosity, imagination, creativity, emotional intelligence, social intelligence. The capabilities that are required to identify unseen problems and opportunities and address them. I often get the pushback of, well, wait a minute, John, come on, some of us are capable of that kind of creativity and imagination, but most of us just want to be told what to do. Well, my answer to that is let's go to a playground and let's look at children 6 or 7 years old. Show me one that doesn't have curiosity, creativity, imagination. We all had it. Something happened to us, and that was we went to school. And we were taught not to be curious, not to be creative. Listen to the teacher, memorize what the teacher says, and demonstrate that you memorized it on the exams. And that's the way you'll be successful at work. And yes, for the kind of work we've had, that's the way to be successful. I use the metaphor of a muscle. To us, capabilities is like a muscle. We all have that muscle. For many of us, it's atrophied because it hasn't been used, but it's still there, waiting to be exercised. And once it's exercised, watch out. Amazing things will happen. So I think that shifting from capabilities to skills. Another one is focusing on motivation. One of the big things in future of work discussions today is lifelong learning. We all need to be lifelong learners. Whoa, wait a minute. Lifelong learning takes a huge amount of effort. What's the motivation to do lifelong learning? Again, based on some of the research we've done, actually a key motivation is a very specific form of passion. We call it the passion of the explorer. People who have this kind of passion are driven to learn. They seek to learn every minute. And again, in a bit of a contrarian spirit, we contrast that with the whole focus today on worker engagement. In our view, the key to unleashing this new form of work is not worker engagement, it's worker passion. How do we get workers to feel that passion and pursue that passion? Very different form of opportunity. If we take this seriously, though, it's going to require us to rethink everything in the company. We've done a lot of work around the topic of work environment redesign. We're big fans of design thinking and design methodologies. What if we redesigned our work environments? And I don't mean just the physical environment, also the virtual environment, the management systems. What if we redesigned the entire worker experience with the primary goal of accelerating learning and performance improvement? What would the work environment look like? It would be extremely different from the one we have today. Again, in the business world today, we're all focused on business process re-engineering. How do we get more efficient processes? Our belief is we're going to need to shift from business process re-engineering to something that we call business practice redesign. It's all about practices in work groups that are going to drive that kind of addressing unseen problems and opportunities. So big shifts in all areas of business, different forms of leadership required. And that, as we start to talk about transformation, I will just say the one thing that I have to say is never ever underestimate the power of the immune system and the antibodies that exist in every large institution and will mobilize and are mobilizing to crush any efforts to change the fundamental way we work. Big challenges ahead as we go through this transformation. But on the other hand, it's not only an opportunity, but we believe an imperative. In a world of mounting performance pressure, if we don't make this transition and find ways to create more and more value for the enterprise, we will be marginalized. And I think the interesting thing to us is in the context of the future of work discussions, it's often becomes a win-lose kind of proposition. In the traditional efficiency model of the future of work, workers know it's just a matter of time before their job's going to be eliminated. And in that kind of situation, you get the win-lose mindset. The company's going to win, I, as the worker, am going to lose. I think the big opportunity and need for all of us is to shift to a win-win perspective, where by redefining work at a fundamental level, the company wins because more and more value gets created and delivered to the marketplace, but the workers win as well, because for the first time, they are actually doing work that human beings should be doing. Thank you very much.
I'll go to your next, Yves. Your next, yeah. Thank you, John. And now Yves Pigneur, and again, you know him best from Business Model Canvas and the books Business Model Generation and Value Proposition Design. But I think today we're going to hear about some different material. We're going to hear some comments on culture.
Thank you. You know, I'm a little bit the black swan here because I'm jumping in this panel and I know that since I think day before yesterday only. And so when I see in this topic, I say, okay, what I have to say on this topic, I'm not expert in leadership, in coaching, in human resources, workforce management. So I say, I will focus a little bit on this idea of culture, because if we want to be adapted, then we need to change something, and most of the time we need to change something in the DNA of the company, in the culture of the company. And I'm not expert in this field, but what we are convinced with Alex, that we are toolsmiths. We think that to assess a phenomena, to observe a phenomena, or to design something, such as changing the culture of a company, we need to have the right vocabulary, the right notation, ideally the right visual tool to do something and to help people to do something. And we share this idea with an architect here, Richard Buckminster, where we are sure that we can train people, we can explain something, some phenomena, but we can also provide them with a tool, and this tool will maybe create it or lead new ways of thinking. It was the idea that we had, for example, when we created the business model canvas for helping entrepreneurs to create or test or design or renovate their business model. It was also the case for the value proposition canvas. And tomorrow Alex will present a last one. But 2 years ago, I think, or 2 or 3 years ago, we had this idea with Dave Gray that it's possible also to understand the culture, but maybe also, and to observe a culture inside the company, and maybe to design a culture or to map this culture. And so we came with a new tool that we call the culture map. With this ID, we will have the right notation to or observe an existing culture in the company, but we could also use the same tool for creating and to consider what we have to change in this existing culture to be able to adapt to some phenomena that we would like to deal today. And I will try to illustrate this in two different situations. The first one will be if we want to observe a culture inside a company. You know, most of those existing companies have inherited in the last couple of years or a long time some behaviors. And you can observe some existing, and I guess that you will recognize some of them. Some little interest in work, fear of technology, we mentioned this, avoid responsibility. And when we say people have to work together to do something, they sometimes participate with this idea of blaming or infighting or having their own agenda. They refuse to share something. And at the leadership level, we have also some, they play the power games in a way, or they play this idea of prestige or politics. They focus on quarterly numbers. And so you can observe this in some existing companies, and I guess that you will recognize some of them. But this one you can observe. You can also observe that this one has a consequence. Okay, it's what we call the outcomes. And from the perspective of individuals, people, employees, you can have burn-on phenomena, burnout, and all those things that you can observe as the outcomes of such behaviors. And those behaviors are based or causes by some informal rules, routines, rituals, habits, and so on. And you can recognize here some of them. Most of the time we mention this people serve processes. They are controlled by numbers or indicators. You can have some unclear, unfair compensation programs. Failure most of the time is a career suicide. And at the leadership level, you have infrequent communication with employees, title over performances phenomena. This one is clearly a loss of meaning for most of the employees or people. And you recognize here the outcome, the consequence of your behaviors, and what we call the enablers and blockers, in this case, some habits, processes, and so on, which causes such behaviors. If you want to change something, if you want to change the outcome, it's not possible to change directly and to decide you will change the behaviors of inside your company. You need to change the causes of, so what we call those enablers and blockers. I agree with you that some companies have, you can observe some phenomena or some what we call behaviors inside. You have some openness to innovation, you have some multidisciplinary teamwork, chief happiness officer sometimes. And it's based on some causes, if you want, because you organize, or some companies organize, hackathons, boot camps, design sprints. But you have also to recognize that in most of the case, it's a kind of innovation comedy or innovation theater. Because it's not aligned with the main culture that you have here in red, it means that sometimes it's even increased the schizophrenia of those employees because they have this impression they have to innovate, but most of the time those innovation processes will be blocked or killed because it's not aligned with the main culture. This is observation, and I like to say that this difference between the green and the red here, we have two phenomena that you can observe. First is fear to lose the job and so on, because this culture is quite toxic, but also is infantilization because we play something sometimes, we have those team building activity and so on, but it's just a game in a way. So it's not clearly aligned with the main culture of the company, so it won't change something. You can use the same tool, and in a way, with this kind of boring organization, it's more and more difficult to attract talented people. Why? Because, for example, the millennials are not ready to be aligned with this culture. So they would prefer to have something. And we have some clear indication, for example, at the university, that some of our students 20 years ago in Switzerland would like to go to the banks and pharma industry, Nestle, Procter, and so on. And now we have more and more people who say, I don't like this kind of culture. I would prefer to go some organization, some SMEs, or even startups. And we can use also the same tool for doing something, because if you want to align a little bit more and to manage this blended future of work, it means that if you have this kind of culture, it will be more and more difficult, because as John told us, the employees are a kind of part of the machine. And if we want to change something, we could maybe design a new structure, a new culture, and to say, what if we use this kind of things? And we have seen some companies ready to play this game where it seems that it's more appealing to work for. And so I will just mention briefly some of them that we could consider. At the individual level, the behaviors that we would like to see as passion for work, or takes ownership, autonomy, courage, and so on. At team, we would like to have more collaboration, to trust people. At the leadership, we could have people helping the others to work, to grow, and to balance their private life and the work, and to maybe to listen to different teams. But this one is not possible to declare that you will have those kind of behaviors. Okay, but if you have those behaviors, maybe you could have some engagement, a little more developed. People do their best. People could be happy to work, or at least to balance better their work and the private life they have in parallel of the work. But it's not possible to decide this one. If you want to have this kind of behavior with the consequence of those income, you need to do something very concretely to change something in the habits, in the process, in the routine, in the rituals that you have. And you could have some of them that you will recognize. You could believe, at the people level, believe in the company mission, or to have no compromise hiring, no hassle rules, for example, to say we will try to have the best people to do something, people motivated to continue. Teleworking could be developed. It's very concrete action that you could manage, and you could maybe influence the behavior that we would like to have. That's the reason why we call those things enablers. And at the incentive, we could have a more fair or competitive compensation program, and you will have something inside the company to say we will be a little bit more open to risk and to accept those risks. And having or refusing this idea that it will be a career suicide, as I mentioned before, as a problem. And you can also have something very concrete at the leadership level. And at this level, you can decide something, because it's a decision-making process to decide those enablers, blockers. And since you design this culture, it means also that you can test something. So you can come with some enablers that you are convinced that it will work, and to see if it will have an impact at your level of the behavior and the outcomes. And so this is the last message. Don't let your company culture just happen, because it will continue. I guess that if you are able to change something in your enablers, blockers, you could maybe drive the behaviors that will have an impact on the outcome. Good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Terrific. And finally, Hal Gregersen.
Thank you. Questions are not only the answer to our challenges today from my perspective, but they've always been the answer to our challenges. And I'm going to go back 30 years when I started being a researcher, and I studied globalization. Interviewed 100 people who were global leaders landing in a new country, didn't know the language, didn't know the business, but had to figure out how to do their work well. A.G. Lafley back then was not the CEO of Procter & Gamble. This was 30 years ago. And in the interview with A.G. Lafley, he asked me more questions than I asked him. And the point is, he was inquisitive, and curious in the sense of always asking questions. Then, 10 years later, I started research around leading transformation and change. And guess what? The leaders who were exceptional during that decade of driving change and transformation in a good way, they were also very good at asking the right questions. Then, about a decade ago, started work with Clayton Christensen, Jeff Dyer on a book called The Innovator's DNA. We interviewed 200 plus leaders who were the most innovative on planet Earth. And guess what? The core central starting skill was asking the right questions. Every one of those scenarios, globalization, transformation, innovation, we're always operating on the edge of uncertainty. We're walking into the unknown. And when that happens, that's the space from which questions truly are the answer. Peter Drucker knew this in the 1950s. He said the important and difficult job is never to find the right answer, it's to find the right question, because there's nothing more dangerous or useless than the right answer to the wrong question. Now I'm going to bring us today, digital transformation, artificial intelligence. You may have heard about this study where basically you feed the computer the training data, they learn how to identify objects, but when you introduce something into that picture that the computer doesn't already understand, like that elephant on the far left that's sort of vague and gray, the computer gets all mixed up and has no idea what's going on. Here's the point for me, and here's what matters most in my message to you today. In this world of artificial intelligence and digital transformation, our ability as human beings to ask the right question is the capability that will have humanity win in the war against artificial intelligence, and that's the final sort of story here. Because the computers today can't ask the sort of questions we can to see obviously what's going on in this picture. We can. And to me, the point of going forward and keeping humanity in a world full of automation is that we as human beings keep that questioning capability deeply, vibrantly alive. Now, over the last 5 years, I've had the chance to interview 200 leaders at companies like these, either founders or CEOs, from all sort of sectors, public, private, government, artists, and beyond, and asking them, how do you ask the right questions? How do you keep that capability alive? What do you do on a daily basis to make a difference in your questioning capacity? Jeff Bezos put a very straightforward, getting the right question is key to getting the right answer. It might as well have been Peter Drucker 70 years ago. He knows it. Every one of these leaders knows that when we're operating on the edge of uncertainty, questions are the key that unlock the windows of opportunity. Let me give you a couple of examples. These leaders are very adept and habitual about creating conditions for themselves and other people. Conditions where they are wrong rather than right, uncomfortable rather than comfortable, where they are reflectively quiet and listening empathetically, very carefully. When they engage in situations and with people that those conditions are ripe and fully present, guess what? Questions emerge that otherwise wouldn't, that again open up windows of opportunity. A fun story, Fadi Gondor, Jordanian, founded a company called Aramex decades ago. It's like FedEx, DHL, and UPS. It's a logistics company. He's the CEO, he's the founder, he's the expert in the organization, he's rich, he's famous, he's pretty charismatic. But when he lands in Dubai at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's got a meeting at 8 o'clock the next day, he sets up the conditions to ask the different questions. So instead of having a limo or a taxi or an Uber driver take him to the hotel, whom does Fadi choose to take him to the hotel? An Aramex delivery truck driver. It's not convenient, it's not easy, but it's crucial, as Clayton Christensen told me in an interview with him, to actively seek out passive data. That's the crucial key to getting a new question. So Fadi gets in the delivery truck. He goes on his way, and as he gets to the hotel, he realizes there are problems here, and he ends up being able to ask the questions that lead him to a space where he realizes, I didn't know what I didn't know, I had a huge blind spot, and we need to do something different here so this truck driver can do his job better. They had an all-person meeting the next day, and from that meeting, they ended up changing things so that that driver could more successfully do his, or if it was a woman, her work. Here's the point. He put himself in those conditions where he could be wrong and uncomfortable and quiet and listen and see things he otherwise wouldn't see. Ed Catmull at Pixar is no different. He's certainly different in personality. Ed is a scientist by training. He's a problem solver by heart. Creativity to Ed is problem solving. He's a listener at the core, and even when Steve Jobs used to come at him with all kinds of ideas, some of which he didn't agree with, Ed would carefully listen and usually step back, take a day, maybe a week, to reflectively think about another way of looking at the possibility. There is a question that Ed Catmull wakes up every morning, has for over a decade, maybe 2 decades, which is, how do I build an organization that is sustainably creative? And at the core of that, how do I build an organization where the toughest questions get asked publicly in a way that's productive? And so when you walk into this space at Pixar, you've got an amazing parking lot when you go into it, where employees care so much about what they're doing that they actually, on their own, create spare wheel tire covers for images of the people who are the characters in the movies. You walk into the front sort of area, you see the Steve Jobs building, you see the Luxo lamp, you're reminded of history, you see the Academy Awards sitting there as you walk through as you're going to work, and then you're going to work. And let's pretend you're a director, maybe at Pixar, maybe at Disney. These are the 2 most recent movies. But here's what those directors have to go through on a regular basis. They have what they call a brain trust at Pixar and a story trust at Disney. You're starting a movie like Brad Bird did with The Incredibles. 8 years ago, before the movie launched, you launched your first idea in a room called the Brain Trust, where other directors who are equally competent as you have an obligation, a responsibility to come into that room and give you complete candor feedback about what they think is good and what they think is bad about that movie. Now, here's the difficult part. For Brad and most of the other directors, that movie and its story is about them. It's their story. So the feedback they're getting is not only about the movie, but it's about them as human beings. And they have to construct a safe enough space where those other directors can give them the toughest possible questions, the toughest possible feedback. It's usually 3 hours long, and they leave exhausted if you're a Brad Bird. They often take the weekend off to recover from it. But the point is, they got the tough questions, they got the tough data, and that's what leads movies that suck, that are horrible at the beginning, in their words, become the blockbusters in the end. Now, Ed Catmull once told me, good questions are recursive. This is the point that I think I meant when he said he wakes up every day, how do I build an organization that is sustainably creative? He knows that there are forces at work every day that shut down questions, that shut down inquiry, and cause products, services, business models, their future to be different than they could be. So here's my question to all of us. What are the recursive questions that you're asking when you show up at work in the morning? As an individual, what are the questions that your company is showing up, caring about in the morning as an organization? Am I creating the space, the place, the environment where the conditions thrive for new questions to surface, the toughest questions? And those conditions are when people are going to be wrong and uncomfortable and quiet. These are not the normal routines of that machine environment. You're right, John, they are not. But they are the routines of people who are operating on that edge of uncertainty, who are trying to build something that's never been built before, who are trying to figure out things that we honestly don't know today but could create tomorrow. Those are the people who are asking these questions over and over. They're creating the conditions over and over for other people to also ask the tough questions. And in the final sort of point, in the spirit of John's comment about kids and questioning, we not only in our organizations need to create these safe places where people can ask and answer the toughest questions, We need to do that as adults in our organizations because it's the only way to walk through this future of digital transformation and artificial intelligence. But we also need to do the same for the young people who are around us, our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors' children, our communities. These young people have their questions crushed, and the only way we can keep them from having questions crushed is for us to create that sort of space in our homes, in our communities, in our work, where the capacity to ask thrives, doesn't get shut down. And that, to me, is the most human of the human future. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Hal. We just have a very short amount of time left, but there have been questions pouring in. I want to make sure that the conversations also continue over lunchtime later, so please approach the panel with those. But I can summarize a number of these, that there's a sort of a vein here of, so what should a manager be doing differently according to what you've put out on the table? And we've sort of seen some hints of that, like Jim, rather than getting people to behave more like machines, let's help people develop their human strengths more, especially their empathy. And John talked about building capabilities, getting people motivated more, feeding their passion instead of thinking so much about engagement. But if you're a manager in an organization, what measurable thing could you do differently next week if this is now central to your job? And maybe what should you not be emphasizing as much? Jim, do you want to start?
Sure. So one phrase we've been using is the role of managers in curating culture. So you coach individuals, but what do you do at a more macro level? So we talked about culture. And what is the role of leaders to do that? And how do we create new management processes for that? So instead of spending all your days having people come to you for meetings that are scheduled, do you actually build in time on your agenda to go out and wander around and talk to people maybe that you wouldn't normally have a chance to talk with? And the evidence for that, if you want to say, well, what's the measure? How could we measure if a leader at Steelcase is doing this? What I've learned now is when people are trying to make an argument to me, I listen to hear, are they making the argument based on facts and analyses, things that are in our computer systems and have come out of typical analyses? Or are they able to tell me stories that have some texture to them, stories that tell me that they actually sat with somebody with this problem we're trying to solve? They understand that problem through the eyes of that person. And they can be detailed and specific about what that person was feeling and thinking and what it's like to be them. So it's a new way of testing whether someone's done their homework. I assume they've done the analysis, but have they done the work that it takes to really feel what people are feeling?
So as the boss of a lot of people who are managing a lot of people, you feel like you have the information you need to promote, have the people rise in the organization who are building empathy, who are helping their people be, to develop their human strengths?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's something we work on intentionally, and it starts with me. So when I travel, one thing that I try to do, wherever I go in our world, is my day will be booked, as yours are, with meetings that are official meetings that I'm supposed to be going to review financials or product development. And I'll always try to build in an hour to meet with 5 or 6 people that I've never met before. And I don't know what I'm going to learn, but every time I do this, I learn more in that 1 hour than I learn in all the other meetings that were designed for me. Just because this group of people have experiences that I've never experienced before. So we practice this at my level and every level of the company now, making the act of asking questions, but also listening actively to the answers and feeling what people are feeling, be part of what defines success.
Mm-hmm. Hal, we just brought up questions. Like, it sounds like what you want organizations to do is just become more hotbeds of questioning. But is that something that could possibly be measured? Would you know if you're more so this year than last year? How does that translate to management behaviors that could be rewarded?
I mean, to me, there are some fun questions to ask ourselves as leaders or the people around us, and one of those, or there are three of them. When was the last time someone asked you an uncomfortable question? When was the last time you were dead wrong about something? And in the spirit of listening, how many seconds do you wait after you ask a question to hear a response? And they're very simple metrics, but if I haven't had a tough question or an uncomfortable one in 2 weeks, if I haven't been dead wrong about something in the last 2 weeks, if I haven't learned how to shut up for 4 or 5 seconds after I ask a question, I am pretty certain I'm going to get blindsided by something I didn't know, that passive data floating around out there, and that's the worst of all worlds. So that's at the very core of it, but I love the spirit of this listening thing. I'll never forget a few years ago at the World Economic Forum Davos meetings, running into Mark Benioff again, and I asked Mark, how do you ask the best questions? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, one word, listen. And then he stared right at me for about 5 seconds. And I think he was trying to figure out, is Hal Gregersen really listening? And then we had a 20-minute conversation about what does it mean to really listen. And I think it's fascinating, if you walk through the New York Salesforce office or the San Francisco Salesforce office, they have meditation rooms that are actually used, where people not only are listening to others, but they take a moment to step back and listen to themselves. And that space for reflective quiet and solitude is so crucial in a time of transition. And the issue is, are we creating it when everyone's running at this super frenetic, fast pace? That's the suggestion for me.
You know, I think we're going to have to leave it there, although I feel like I've cheated Yves and John, but I hope that we'll keep the conversation going over the next 2 days. I'm sure you'll be here. And I think I have to now just thank my panelists and thank all of you for your close attention.